Good morning. My name is Susie, and I'll be reading from the book of Matthew, chapter 11, verses 28 through 30. Come to me, all you who are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light.
So a couple of years ago, I was invited to be a part of an app that was being developed by some software engineers who had a spiritual hunger. The gist of the app would be that a number of spiritual leaders across different traditions and backgrounds and belief systems would create short videos or audio content that would be lessons or devotions or thoughts or just a whole host of different categories. And they would be tagged accordingly by tradition and by all of that sort of deal. And then the user would go on to this app and they would look up people within the tradition that they're interested in and they would listen. And if they liked what they heard, they would, give it a thumbs up or whatever. And over time, the algorithm within this app would figure out what your particular spiritual compass was and then would craft a feed of content for you to digest. Kind of like Spotify for spirituality. At first, I thought, wow, what a fun opportunity and also a neat way to make a little bit of money because, every time somebody streams, you get a little bit of that, which also is a little dystopian because then you're like, what kind of spirituality will get me the most likes, right? But that's only the tip of the dystopian iceberg because what happens next is, imagine, if you will, you're on this app, which never got made, by the way, because I feel like every other spiritual leader thought about it and then was like, this is a terrible idea. But imagine, if you will, you start listening and you disagree with something that somebody says and no, I don't like it. But then somebody else says something you do like and you go, yes, I like that. And pretty soon your entire feed is just people who already agree with what you already believe, but are maybe just saying it in different ways so it seems new and fresh. And you now have a group of spiritual experts who are backing up what you already believe. This was an attempt to help the spiritual but not religious crowd who have abandoned organized religion to kind of figure out a way forward without having to be attached to a spiritual community. Because for so many of us, that is a problem. And this for me is so... Now, that app never got made, but I feel like we're still doing it even without an app. Especially those of us who may not be deeply entrenched in one particular wisdom tradition, we tend to make a piecemeal of our spirituality. We treat it like a buffet. We go to the shady maple of our souls and we get just the little pieces that we want, and we make ourselves this beautiful plate that is the weirdest combination of foods, but one that makes sense to us. And that's fine for shady maple, but at no point does that spirituality ever challenge you. All it does is further drive home your preconceived worldview and notions that you have never actually interrogated or figured out why you believe that thing. You ever thought about why you believe what you believe? Most of us have. A little bit, maybe. But I think if we're honest with ourselves, we don't remember. We don't know where we first heard that one idea that made sense to us when we were 6, and now it's become a core part of our identity and our worldview. We don't know. And so when we are just allowing ourselves to be the center of our spiritual journey, we are just letting that unexamined part of us be in charge. And that's why I think that Jesus' words to us in this passage are so important. Jesus invites us not to simply learn from him or try to be like him, to emulate him, to look at his example and try to do that thing, but to be yoked to him. For those of you who are not, 12th century farmers, can you show them what a yoke is? Or modern day farmers in places where we still are connected to the earth and aren't tilling it with machines. A yoke is usually this wooden device that attaches two dogs, a slow one and a crazy one, and the crazy one would pull us, and I had the leashes tied together, and it was our way of getting Claire to slow Juliet down and Juliet to keep Claire going. And they kind of met somewhere in the middle. So we are not leashed to Jesus. We are not chained to Jesus. We are yoked to Jesus. That is a way of forcing you to move as Jesus moves. And I think to grow, we have to be yoked to something. We have to be yoked to something deeper and larger and wider than ourselves, because if we don't, we're never challenged. Not truly, deeply, intrinsically challenged. We need it because it challenges us. Otherwise, we will just subconsciously be reinforcing our unexamined worldviews all the time and never actually grow and further descend into our silos. So what does it mean, friends, to be yoked to Jesus? Jesus, who says that his yoke is easy and his burden is light. His yoke is easy and his burden is light. I'll tell you one thing, that it's not. It is not comfortable, and it is not simple. So please don't take those words and get them twisted. That when Jesus says, my yoke is easy and my burden is light, he does not mean in any way, shape, or form that it is going to be simple and comfortable. And as the great philosopher once said, life is pain. Anyone who tells you different is selling you something. And by philosopher, I mean Wesley from The Princess Bride. But the truth is true. Any preacher who will stand up in front of you and tell you that the gospel is all about you being prosperous, about making money, about being happy, about being overwhelmed with bliss constantly, about being too blessed to be stressed, is trying to get your money in their offering plate so that they can buy another jet. Jesus never once promised that it would be comfortable and that it would be simple. In fact, he promised in no uncertain terms it would be quite the opposite. Only one of his disciples died of natural causes. I'm so sorry. And legend has it that Domitian tried to boil him in oil and he just wouldn't burn. So they sent him to an island where he lived out his life and lived in a cave and wrote some books. And this is John, by the way. John's a super cool disciple. He made it. Hooray! Oh, but being yoked to Jesus is not about individual comfort at all. It's about transformation. Jesus' words about easy and light often, I think, lead us astray. I think we come to this passage when we're feeling already burnt out, when we're not doing self-care, but we're doing a kind of emergency triage. When we've already crashed and burned and we go, Jesus, I need you now to bandage my wounds and sing gently to me and rub my forehead because I am already destroyed. And I don't think that's what Jesus means at all. In fact, the word easy here, okay, don't get it twisted again. Easy doesn't mean effortless. The word easy here is probably better translated as well-fitted. Take my yoke onto you. It's the right size. It's like a really good pair of pants. Am I right, Amanda? When you get that just right pair of pants and you're like, this has the exact right amount of pockets in it, I can carry all the things I need. You know, for when you need a spare battery on you, you have cargo pants for that, right? Take my cargo pants upon you. They are easy, right? That's what Jesus is saying. They fit you. It was designed for you. When you take my yoke upon you, you will find that it is natural, that this is who you were created to be. This is what it means to be a true human. When you are yoked to Jesus, eventually, when you figure out Jesus' rhythm, it feels right. It feels like the truest way to be alive in this body. And my burden is light doesn't mean, you know, it's light. Think of it more like manageable. It's not oppressive. He's talking about these religious leaders who will throw rules on you and regulations on you, and you are not good enough and right enough until you've done X, Y, and Z. That is a heavy burden. Jesus says, I have already loved you completely as you are. You don't have to do better but for me to love you more. That is my burden is light. You can carry that, right? So what does that mean? It means that Jesus offers us a yoke that is perfectly suited to transform us. Not to make life simpler, but to reshape and align us to a deeper, truer purpose. So I think about this for myself, and I think, what would it mean to truly be yoked to Jesus? How would I feel if I'm imagining this literally, by the way, I'm imagining myself as some kind of oxen being attached to Jesus. How would I feel now having Jesus be in the lead? Honestly, I would find it very annoying. Jesus moves really, really slowly. So slow. In fact, there's this prevailing theme throughout the stories in the Gospels of people complaining to Jesus that he's way too slow. At one point, his friend Lazarus is dying, and they send word, and they're like, you need to come right now. He's dying. Do your magic healing thing. He's dying. And Jesus takes his time. He could have ran. He could have gotten a horse. He could have, kept going. But instead, he's like, well, the sun's going down. We're going to get a place to sleep. We're going to have a nice dinner, and we're going to just take it slow. And when he got there, Lazarus had died. And they were just so confused. They were like, how can you move slowly at a time like this? Of course, if you know the rest of the story, it's that Jesus trusted that death was not the end for his friend, for himself, and for anyone. We read about Jesus and his disciples being in a boat in a storm, and Jesus is napping in the bow of the ship. He finds a way to take a nap in the middle of a storm. Can you imagine? Can you imagine such a thing? So many times Jesus goes and disappears, goes off to be by himself in the mountains, and his disciples are like, Jesus, where were you? We've been looking all over for you. It's already 10:30. We need to go. We've got a schedule to keep. At one point, he is building up a following. He's doing really good church planting, and he's got critical mass of people. And instead of building on that success, he decides to leave Israel entirely and go off to Gentile territory where nobody gave a hoot about who he was. And his disciples are confounded. How does he keep doing this? Moving so slowly, so seemingly without vision, without a plan. And I think the key there is that Jesus moves at a relational pace, not at the pace of immediacy, but at the pace it takes to build trust and build relationships with people. A pace that is frustrating at times to those of us who feel like we need to get moving. This is very serious. These are unprecedented times. A pace that may be frustrating but is ultimately life-giving. Now, some years ago, when I was living in Philly, I used to bike to work. It was about 1.5 miles. And so, on my bike, it would take me, 7 or 8 minutes or something like that. And I started this spiritual practice that I called holy inefficiency, where instead of biking to work and getting to work at exactly the time I'm supposed to be there, I would instead leave about an hour early, and I would walk the 1.5 miles to work with plenty of time to spare so that I can walk slowly. I can notice things. I can pick up trash along the way. I can say hi to people as I pass them. And this is Philly, so not everyone wants to say hi. And oftentimes the people that do are not the people that you should be talking to. But I took it upon myself to be intentionally slow, inefficient, not moving at, the perfectly scheduled pace that I'm used to. And it was so hard to force myself to get ready early and to waste time. I could have spent that time sleeping more. I could have spent that time playing more video games or watching more TV. I could have spent that time cleaning. But instead, I chose to take that time to walk slowly. There is a wisdom to Jesus' slowness that I think we need now more than ever. It's hard to be slow, isn't it? It's more than anything, I think, hard to not feel guilty about a slow pace when everything feels so urgent. It feels like a luxury we cannot afford to be slow right now. When we're so keenly aware of all that is wrong in the world, slowness feels like a luxury, like something I should feel guilty about. And I'll say things like, well, maybe someday when things aren't so crazy, I'll take some time. Then I'll make a space for a more healthy pace. Then I'll find time to rest. Then I'll allow myself some moments to breathe. But here's the thing. It won't matter because that day is never coming. That day will never come on its own because no matter what is actually happening in the world, our attention has already been colonized by corporations who make billions of dollars overloading our amygdalas and wearing us out with outrage. The news, in heavy quotation marks for those listening at home, is presented to us these days as an objective good. It is good in and of itself to be informed in a democracy. Correct? To know all of the ins and outs and to understand all of the issues that are facing us. It is well and it is good and it is morally upstanding to be familiar with everything. But these multinational corporations have hijacked that virtue and using state-of-the-art neuroscience, because this is insidious, They have crafted news experiences that are designed to trigger your most primal emotions and instincts so that you keep clicking and you keep scrolling and you keep looking, because every click, every scroll, every look is another ad, is another cent in their pocket. They don't care if it is slowly destroying you as long as your attention turns a profit. They treat our brains the way that factory farms treat the soil. And we keep running back to them for more because we're so addicted to the dopamine that comes from more outrage. that we cannot help it. And every time we engage with it, we teach the algorithm that we want more, and it gives us more, and that more gives us more dopamine, and we are all addicts addicted to outrage. And the multinational corporations making billions off of your attention span are more than happy to keep giving you more outrage. And I don't think it's actually helping us to be better citizens. Because the news, as we have it now, whether you get it from TV or papers or social media or wherever you get it from, takes the most distant, sensational crises and makes them feel immediate, while in so doing, making local matters feel irrelevant in comparison. Like, I honestly know so much more about the happenings of Kiev than I do about the happenings of Pottstown. Because when my head is full of bombs and dictators, potholes and liquor licenses seem trivial. But they're not. This is the thing that I can actually control, that I can actually experience, that where I can actually plant my roots is right here, not over there. Being yoked to Jesus means deliberately decolonizing our attention and not letting those corporations make billions off of our sanity. It means drawing our gaze back to local, personal, and immediate relationships and issues that we can meaningfully influence. So what are the practical implications of that for a people group that I know are like me and are addicted to the outrage? And we who care deeply about the world and want to see it made better, who are already out there on the front lines, who are maybe already too inundated with information but can't get enough because we feel that we need to do something about it. I'm not suggesting that we turn everything off and we build a cabin in the middle of the wilderness and we get away from it all. Though, if anybody wants to and is willing to fund it, I'll consider it. What I'm saying that we need to do is we need to recognize our limits and recognize them not as faults, but as a sacred part of being human. To accept our limitations as holy, as human, and as honest, not as a failure of compassion or a mark of privilege. Jesus, in his day, did not attempt to reach every single person in Israel. In fact, there were towns and communities where he could have never gotten to because he was one man in 3 years. And so there are some stories. There's a great story of Jesus healing this man of all of these demons, and he was a menace to society, and he was healed and made clean and good. And he said, Jesus, I would like to follow you wherever you go. And Jesus says, no, I want you to go home and teach them what I've taught you. Where Jesus said, I'm outsourcing this mission. It is too important for me to think I have to do everything myself. He knew that his limits are not failures. They force us to focus on depth, not breadth. When you know you can't fix every problem, it forces you to focus on one problem and to do it well and to do it relationally and deeply. And then they force us to rely on others. They force us to trust. And that's the other thing we need to do. We need to rediscover our trust. Being yoked to Jesus means believing that God ultimately holds the world's pain. That we participate in God's redemption. We don't control God's redemption. We move with God's timing, which often means that we don't get to see the change that we want to see in our lifetimes. But when we trust that God is still ultimately in control, that frees us to rest, which is the other thing we need to do. We need to embrace rhythms of rest and retreat. Not just when we crash, but beforehand. Following Jesus' example of regular withdrawal, of reflection and renewal as essential activities for activists. You know, nothing made the disciples more upset when Jesus decided to prioritize his own mental and spiritual health over what they saw as the immediate mission in front of them. They could never understand how he could just nap so much. But if Jesus had not embraced those rhythms of rest, then he would have burned out long before he finished his ministry. So I think for us as a people, we need to recognize our limits as sacred. We need to rediscover trust in God and others, and we need to embrace rhythms of rest and retreat. So what do you think? What does it practically look like for a group of people who care deeply about the world and want to see it made better and are actively involved in that process to walk at Jesus's intentional, transformative tempo? What does that look like for you? What does that look like for us?